So Chris, I don't know, Dr. Gonzalez, what was that psalm? Be with me, Lord. You know the number? I wanted to share it, just so you know, I'm no biblical scholar, but that really touched me. 91. Remember that. That's your gift for today. And I'm going to tell you that I went through the hurricanes. This is not here. Went through the hurricanes, and during the hurricanes, we had the nuns stay with us. You remember the triple hurricane year, right? So we had the nuns stay with us during that time, and I stumbled almost literally on Sister Marta, a person that is holier than me, and I'm assuming some of you, okay? And she was on the floor, kneeling, praying, and I said, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm praying for a couple that is trapped in the hurricane and they're stuck." And she was praying as them, And I hear that psalm, and it makes me think we could all be better, right? And we all want to help the people in Ukraine. And most of us will be able to help with prayer, fasting, and giving, right? We know we can do that. But we want to do it like Sister Marta did it, at this level. So it's more powerful, if you will. And interestingly, we have this series called Attitude Adjustment. And to that end, this series is about humility. It's about looking inward first to make yourself a better Christian, the Christian that God intended you to be, right? And to do that, we have to clean up inside and then go outside. So this series is about humility, and all of us could use that. Probably the greatest of all the virtues, the greatest, ironically, is humility. It's lowering yourself, okay? And many think that humility is weakness, low self-esteem, low opinion of yourself. None of that is true. St. Bernard says, humility is knowledge of yourself as you really are. Humilitas, that word in Latin, means to be grounded, to be rooted, okay? And there's this book that we read about, Good to Great by this guy, Jim Collins, not to be confused with our deacon buddy, John Collins. And he studied companies, right? So he's a self-help guy studying companies, looking at what makes them amazing, right? And the ones that came from good companies to great companies. And almost all of them had one leader, and that one leader channeled their own ambitions into the company and the people of the company instead of channeling their ambitions into themselves. They're not weak. These are powerful people. And that's humility. And now transition to a book that you have heard of, which is Deuteronomy, 5th book in the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Somehow that's stuck in my head, right? And Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Bible. So the first book, Genesis, tells the history of Israel, ending with the Israelites stuck in Egypt, okay? The second book tells of their eventual enslavement in Egypt and their subsequent escape from Egypt. Then the third and the fourth, Leviticus and Numbers, tell us about their journey through the desert. And then Deuteronomy tells the end of the first part of the Bible and presents the final teachings of Moses to the Israelites before they enter into the promised land and before he dies. The Israelites had been in the desert for 40 years. Be with me, Lord, And God's intention had been to bring them directly to the promised land, which is a matter of only a few days of journeying from Egypt. But in their impatience and ingratitude and arrogance, or use your word, right? They were forced to wander around, almost literally in circles, for decades, and they wandered until everyone in that first generation had passed away. So they didn't get to the promised land. And at this point of the story, God's calling on the next generation of Israelites, and Moses is preparing them, teaching them about the past to shape his vision, God's vision of their future. And Moses says they should make an offering of their first fruits, the first product, their first margin of profit from a harvest. And this was about giving to God first as a reminder, humility, that everything comes from God. Then Moses says, "You shall declare before your Lord your God, my father was a wandering Aramean," right? That part, with this small household, came to Israel. So this describes the ancestors, and particularly Jacob, who lived in exile as a nomad, and Moses is telling them to remember their humble origin. And he continues, "But there in Egypt, Jacob, became a great nation, strong and numerous. When the Egyptians maltreated and oppressed us, the Israelites, imposing hard labor upon us, we cried out to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and he heard our cry, 'Be with me, Lord,'" right? So this tribe of nobodies eventually ends up in slavery in Egypt, humbler, right? But in their oppression, they turned to God, and God heard their cry. It wasn't by their own power that the Israelites escaped from Egypt and slavery, but because of God's strong hand and outstretched arm, right? It was God who parted the Red Sea. It was God who provided food in the desert, and now it's God who's going to take them to the promised land. So Moses, in his presence, even as they experienced the triumph of their entrance into Israel, the promised land, and the complete defeat of every one of their enemies, they are to do so with like abject humility. They're to bow down. That's what he says. And the Israelites call themselves the chosen people. It sounds like it could be prideful, but it's meant to be the opposite. Other nations boasted of all their strength and accomplishments, yet they call themselves chosen as a reminder that the only thing that they had going for them was that God had chosen them. They were nobody without God. Me too. They were nomads and slaves without God. All they had to offer was what God had given them. So as we begin this series, it might help to be honest. Humility is difficult. It's challenging to be humble, even when we want to do it. Our pride gets in the way, right? We don't like to look bad or lose control. We don't want to admit that we're wrong. We do not like to say we're sorry. It's hard to be humble, even when we want to be. And then the reverse of that is if I've been disrespected, I don't want humility. I want an apology. If I've been offended, I want payback. If I've been hurt, I want revenge. These are all reasons why we need to work on our humility by adjusting our attitude. We need to learn to see humility as something that strengthens us. It builds us up to be the person that God wants us to be. And we see this humility in, say, three basic ways. First, it grounds us in the basic reality that there is a God and it's not me, right? You got that one? Second, humility grounds us in the basic reality that we are made for relationships, this community and the community of the world. And if you can be humble, then you can put the needs of others before yourself. And if you can be humble, you can be merciful. And if you can be more easily be able to receive forgiveness, then you can extend forgiveness because you recognize your own faults and failures first, like we heard last week. So if you could be humble, you can be compassionate because you have the ability that you take the time to understand someone else's situation. And third, humility grounds us in the basic reality that God insists on it before he is willing to act in our lives. You can be successful with God without being highly intelligent, clever in business, outstanding in finances, graceful in appearance, skilled in athletics. You don't need any of that to be successful with God. You cannot be successful with God, though, without humility. Case in point, the Israelites. In fact, the Bible tells us God opposes the proud. He gives grace to the humble. God lifts up the lowly, humbles those who exalt themselves. That's just how God is, right? So next week, we're going to look at the importance of prayer in growing our own humility. And then the following week, we're going to look at some of the obstacles to humility. Pride, I'm thinking, right? And in week 4, we're going to look at how humility helps us turn certain areas of our life around when they're headed in the wrong direction. And then we'll wrap up the series just before Easter by looking at how God favors the humble. So remember, as you pray for others, pray as others, as Sister Marta taught me. And also remember that humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.